I'm Sam Kramer. I'm a senior program director here at NASEO, and glad to have you here. I will turn things over to our Financing Committee Chair, Eddy Trevino. He is the State Energy Director from Texas, and he will be there to kick us off. Eddy, I believe it is also your last Financing Committee call.
This
So
is
feel
my
free to
last
provide some
one.
remarks before we get going.
Yes, this is my last financing committee call. I'm going to miss everybody. I've enjoyed being one of the co-chairs of this committee. So thank you, Sam, for the opportunity, and I appreciate it. Today, we're going to talk green banks. We have three well-informed speakers with us today. Uh, One of the things we need to do before I introduce the speakers is to give you the housekeeping remarks. So if you have any questions for the speakers, it's okay to put them in the chat box or the Q&A box as they're making their presentations. And then otherwise, we're going to take questions once all speakers have presented. We have three speakers today. Dan Adler, who's the Executive Director of the U.S. Green Bank 50. Dan, you're the first executive director of that U.S. Green Bank, right?
We had an interim executive director in the form of Kirsten Stasio from the Nevada Clean Energy Fund. So
Okay.
I'm the first full-time. Yep.
Way to go. Way to go, Dan. And then we
Thank you.
have Shawna Cuan, who's co-founder and chief executive officer of Sustain Energy Finance. Our final speaker is going to be Anmol Vanamali, who is the chief investment officer at Maryland Clean Energy Center. And so, Dan, let's start off with you. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Happy to do it. Thank you so much, Eddie, and thanks for the chance to be with this distinguished group. I've been a fan of NASEO for a long time in my prior service in California state government. Uh, I have some slides to share with you if that's okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and tee that up and tell you the story of Green Banks, what we're up to now, before I hand it over to Shawna and Anmol, the actual operators that can give you the real details of what is happening. All right. Hopefully that comes through all right. The Green Bank 50 is a member-led, member-directed organization of state and local green banks around the country, now 53 members covering 42 states. We formed out of the process of the Inflation Reduction Act, which, as I'm sure some of you, or maybe all of you are aware, one of the main programs in that was to capitalize national entities that would then flow funding down to a network of state and local green banks for purposes of building clean energy infrastructure with a particular emphasis on priority disadvantaged communities. So part of the main message to deliver today is this community is thriving. Half of the network members existed before the IRA. The other half, represented here by some of our membership, is extremely entrepreneurial and dynamic, finding capital sources, originating projects, developing critical energy infrastructure in priority communities, and a natural form of allegiance with state energy offices in ways that I'll describe. So this is our beautiful map. We aspire to cover all of the map with clean energy lending services in the near term, whether that means a green bank in every state or expanding the capacity of existing green banks to service new markets and extend our technical assistance and funding across the entire country. So this is a little bit about how we drive the narrative and develop projects. So this is just some snapshots of market activity. The key thing that differentiates green banks from other lenders, we're not depository institutions. We're effectively a form of development finance, specialty finance, infrastructure lenders. And our strength comes from our ability to stay close to what communities are seeking, particularly now when project developments are challenged by pipeline issues, by access to capital, by shifting policy. It's this close connection to communities that help us drive projects effectively and in partnership so that we can move quickly and get the clean power onto the grid, which, as we all know, is a major driver of economic activity across the country today. We have evolving storytelling capacity. We're about to release our first market impact assessment as a green bank community in the next several months to really highlight how this community is dynamic and finding new partnerships and sources of capital, even as we face continuing uncertainty at the federal level. The thesis being that what we can do now is build, and as we build clean energy, we enhance our capacity to be partners with further capital from the public and private sector and just drive impact and hopefully depoliticize a little bit of what clean energy development is all about. So, as I'm sure you all know, the greenhouse gas reduction funds are frozen. So that tapped, it's shrunk our strength to immediately drive clean energy investments for obvious reasons. But what it has enabled us to do is to pivot our emphasis from the broad set of projects that we would have been able to finance with this $27 billion of balance sheet capitalization to narrow the focus to projects that commercial investors, commercial lenders are interested to develop and shape them such that they can be deployed in communities that are underserved by current capital markets. 60+% of the projects in our collective portfolio as green banks are dedicated to low income and disadvantaged communities. So it's taking proven technology with proven financing capacities, but driving them into communities that are underserved from a capital perspective. So we prioritize those projects with strong local support that accelerates development, that drives down the cost of capital. We engage different capital providers so that we can help shape the offering and make sure we're meeting the needs of capital, but still having a price for the capital that meets the needs of local communities. And there's a strong element of technical assistance in what we provide. So our network membership learns from another, enhances capacity for green banks across the country. Really interesting partnerships going coast to coast where a green bank has been in existence for a decade or more, knows how to address a certain project dynamic and drive capital to a priority community and reaches across the country to help make that happen elsewhere. That's what the GB50 is all about, is that enhanced learning and technical assistance networks that really, I hope, could be of service and interest to NASEO as we go forward. So right now, what we need to be doing is strengthening the membership, that 53 members and growing. They have a variety of needs. We run the gamut from nonprofit structures, small nonprofits, to embedded state entities like my former shop, the California Infrastructure Bank, or the Illinois Finance Authority, other state entities that have a clean energy lending portfolio. So we're strengthening that membership through a range of strategies, including deeper engagement with state policymaking, accelerating community scale projects so that we can take advantage, for instance, of the current tax credit windows that are still open, but making sure that communities feel the benefits of clean energy lending from an affordability and economic development perspective so that the narrative is strong and resonates with policymakers the next time we have the opportunity to extend resources. And there's a need to integrate all the ecosystem actors. We have green banks, we have community development finance institutions, we have credit unions, all trying to do similar things in the clean energy market now. So we exist as a hub for activity and coordination so we can streamline access to capital, access to secondary markets for capital, and drive greater execution on the ground, which enhances the story and helps support policymaking again down the track. So this is a little bit that I won't belabor, just so you get a feel for what GB50 brings to bear for its membership. We have a regranting capacity that helps us support the operations of our network members. We're building a credit enhancement to drive down the cost of capital and access further capital in your states. We have an online learning platform, Climate Capital Connection, that helps our members share resources, connect to new partners, build the capacity of community scale clean energy lending. We're reaching out to a greater and ever expanding network of top level capital providers, Coalition for Green Capital, the Justice Climate Fund, CDFIs, commercial banks, and we have now shared platforms for narrative and communications as well as policy engagement, a series of policy playbooks that we're keen to share with you, how to start a green bank, how to fund a green bank, how to share projects with green banks, what the benefits of green banking can be for energy agendas at the state level. And so just a few more slides here before I turn it over to the actual experts in Shawna and Anmol. But one view of what the fully integrated green bank ecosystem looks like, and we see this increasingly in leadership states, and we believe it's available across the board. Green banks originate projects. That's what they're best at. They have close contact with communities. They can help overcome developmental challenges. In the course of doing this, we can standardize how projects are developed. That adds efficiency. It attracts more capital. It makes this more of a viable piece of clean energy infrastructure, the more it is standardizable and therefore financeable at scale. We provide credit enhancements to drive down the cost, attract further capital. We can aggregate these transactions. That adds to their capacity for selling off into secondary markets, which has the beneficial effect of recycling this capital back to green banks so they can do it again. They can find new markets. They can service new customers. They can be continuously aligned with state policy priorities. And just as an example, again, my former home at the California Infrastructure Bank took an initial allotment from state budgets almost 30 years ago now of roughly $180 million in the course of lending it out to high quality infrastructure projects and then selling those projects in the form of bonds has recycled that capital now 6 times. So taking $180 million to over $1 billion of impact in infrastructure It's a proven methodology in infra finance, and the opportunity here is to use that methodology for clean energy lending at a community scale. So my final thought here on how green banks can support energy offices. One is in project development. We bring capital and technical capacity for our priority infrastructure. You should think of us as folks in the field, in the markets. If there's a set of clean energy assets, demand side, supply side, that are of interest to you, green banks can and are developing that pipeline and those developer relationships. We bring capital access. Our green banks do have balance sheet from a range of sources. That's not the case that the absence of the federal program has withered all of our lending capacity, but we bring our own capital, but we also bring the capacity to leverage private capital into projects, which increases state budgets exponentially. We average somewhere in the order of $5 or $6 of private lending for every dollar of green banking that we bring to bear. It's an opportunity for grant making coordination, one-time grants into perpetual revolving capital, tremendous leverage for scarce public resources. We can also be advisory in how to make sure that when there are state grant dollars for projects, they have maximum impact, that you're filling a discrete gap, and the rest for a project will come from private lenders and green bank capital. So those grant dollars go farther. There's an interesting translational research service or translational service between policy and finance. I've seen this in a number of roles in state government and in the investment community. The language is just different. Green banks can help translate across both sides so that we have more efficient conversations. Each side knows what it's seeking, and we get more impact for energy policy on the ground in states, particularly for, again, priority communities or priority technologies. And I wanted to close with that priority community point. We specialize in reaching underserved communities to drive sustainability, but also economic development and affordability, all key themes for us. Green banks are not just about sustainable energy and clean energy. That's obviously the first and foremost thing. But in this moment where communities, particularly underserved economic communities, need advancement, clean energy projects drive that. They drive jobs, they drive tax base improvements, and they are the cheapest form of power. So even without the environmental attributes, this contributes to the affordability challenge that the country faces. And green banks are fully on board to find and deliver projects that hit those metrics. Just one more view of our beautiful map. It's growing every day. We hope to find alignment with you in your offices. And in order to do that, I hope you will reach out to me. That's my email address there. I'd encourage you also, please reach out on any matter that you hear about today, and also copy hello at US Green Banks to make sure that I don't lose track of it. So that's my intro. Let me turn it over actually back to the facilitators, and I welcome the chance to engage with you in comments and questions here or subsequently. Thank you again.
Eddy, I think you're on
Eddy, you were
mute.
saying I'm next. Is that what I saw mouthed? Sounds good.
You
Thanks so
are next.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Eddy. Nice to be with you all. Again, I'm Shawna Cuan. I'm the CEO of SustainEnergyFinance. We are Utah's green bank, and it's great to be with you all. I actually come from the Governor's Office of Energy Development in Utah, so I very fondly think back to all the NASEO meetings and coming out to DC for the conferences. So missed that group, but it's great to be back with you again. And frankly, I've seen a lot of parallels between our green bank community and how closely our peers work together, and how that's really paralleled with NASEO and the state energy offices. So, but yeah, let me talk a little bit about our work. So in Utah, we are a nonprofit. We're 501(c)(3), which has been a structure that a lot of green banks are taking on, especially the more recent ones that Dan alluded to. That's really the ideal structure for us here in Utah. We spoke with our governor's office, we spoke with legislatures, and that was really the suggested approach, so that we have a little bit of independence, but when it's appropriate, we do work closely with our state entities, and we do work to source state funding for our work. We focus primarily on affordable housing. Being in the Intermountain West, we are dealing with an issue that is quite familiar to most, but we're dealing with a very severe housing crisis alongside rising energy costs and rising water costs. So we are increasingly seeing more demand and pressure for how can we deploy efficiency, clean energy, and water conservation across the state of Utah, particularly in our eastern and southern parts of the state, to really support those more arid regions. The way that we really tackle our work is kind of looking at it from the residential side, and then we work with commercial side. So we actually partnered with another green bank called Self, based in Florida, and we're able to get a $6 million capital commitment to our state for the next 3 years to deploy into home energy loans. And I'm very excited to share that as of last fall, when we launched the program, we've already closed over $100,000 in loans. So we're seeing some pretty rapid demand and take up for it, particularly on our HVAC side. And we expect that, especially with the summertime, we're going to see that demand increasing more. And then on the commercial side, what we really focus on is actually, this is a great way we collaborate with our state, but is in our CPACE program. So Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, which many of you also have similar programs in your states. We work with our state administrator, who's SRS, to be able to source projects. And then we either provide financing directly to those projects ourselves, or we help originate projects and bring new outside lenders into our market to be able to support CPACE projects. And then we also provide pre-development financing for multifamily affordable housing projects. Typically, that's a very high risk area that most banks won't finance, but there is a significant need for it, especially as we're expecting to put several thousand housing units into the Utah market over the next several years. So to date, we've gotten traction of about 16 million in capital for this for Utah, and surprisingly, that's none of that is state funding. But we do fully expect to be reaching to the state and working with them closely to be raising some state dollars in the future. So speaking to, where state energy offices might be able to work with green banks, I do think there's quite a lot of different areas, and I think Eddy has some questions that we can expand on that further. But one of the areas we work is that CPACE program. We're also starting to see a lot more interest in the geothermal side. And while we may not be able to finance geothermal projects ourselves, we can help provide that translation service that Dan referenced between the financing needs for geothermal and then the great policy work that you all do. And then, like many other desert states, we're tracking what water conservation work we can do to help ensure that we have the resources we need for many Utahns here in the future. So, thanks.
Okay, Anmol, you're next.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to NASEO for inviting us. Let me share our screen. I'm not as eloquent as Shawna. I need support of some slides to describe what we do. So if someone can confirm that you can see the slides, that'd be great. Yeah. Good.
Now we can see it. Yep.
All right, excellent. So yes, so we are the Maryland State Green Bank, and I'm the Chief Investment Officer. We are about 22 people full-time that work for the organization, and the finance team is 5 people, including myself, a director, a fund manager, a solar project manager, and a junior analyst, to give you a sense of how we get stuff done. So we've been around since 2008, and we were created as an instrumentality of the state, which is somewhat unique among the 53 odd green banks that Dan was talking about. And that has its positives and some trade-offs there. As a quasi-state agency, we have certain capabilities like conduit financing, which are quite powerful. On the other hand, everything we do has to be done within the confines of state regulation, etc., which sometimes does impede progress, but ultimately, how quickly we get to the end point is always a learning process, and we're getting better at it as well. But as Dan also mentioned, while clean energy is, of course, the focus of the Green Bank, the story is much larger than that. And we recently did a study to understand the true impacts of the Maryland Clean Energy Center. And the research supported the fact that every dollar of public funding that goes to MCEC results in 20 times in terms of state economic output. And even in terms of financing, the 28.7 million in total public funding that we've received, we've been able to mobilize about 270 million in private investment across different energy projects. And most of these projects happen, not surprisingly, in public purpose institutions, which goes to show you that, not only are we saving energy, we're saving energy in places in which the savings are actually resulting in more public service. So it's just an overall story of economic growth, resilience, and of course, alignment with the state's climate goals, which are quite aggressive. So we have a portfolio approach to the way we have organized our financing programs. And there's three ways to think about it. One, if you look at the left column, our programs help meet the energy finance needs of almost every kind of stakeholder you can imagine in the Maryland economy, right? Right from the project developers, real estate developers, all the way to homeowners. So that's one way we've constructed it. The other way we've designed the financing offerings within these programs is to ensure that we're meeting the temporal needs of the energy project lifecycle. So we have programs early stage capital to bridge finance to all the way to permanent capital. So, and I'll get into details of what these programs mean, but that's how we have organized and accumulated our program portfolio. The other lens we adopt while designing these programs and products is how they integrate with the other sources of public funding and private financing, because our attempt has always been to be complementary to the other source of financing, whether public or private, and reduce any redundancy that might happen. So those are the three lenses that we've used to construct this portfolio approach. A lot of this would not have been possible without coordination and direct investment from the State Energy Office. And I'll talk about the three funds which work really closely with the State Energy Office. One is the Bridge Finance Facility. I joined MCC about a year and a change ago, around the time when there was all kinds of disruption happening at the federal level, including all that funding that was meant to go towards the green banks getting pulled away from us, the OBBBA, the tariffs, etc. Just a total state of chaos, as we all know, in the clean energy economy. And we sat down with the Maryland Energy Administration and spoke about what is it that we can do. And the Maryland Energy Administration, MEA for short, are also the custodians of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, which is a fund that accumulates funding through the RGGI proceeds, the alternative compliance payments, etc. So it's hundreds of millions of dollars every year. But we are, in spite of our long history, we were formed 18 years ago. It's only recently that we've developed capacity for direct lending. But we have that now. And so we approached MEA saying, now that we have a team in place, we have processes, how about we use some of the funding that you would have typically given away as grants, as Dan was alluding to, and how do we put them in facilities that are revolving in nature and are perpetual in nature, so they will continue to help. And in the first iteration, why don't we create a product that will help stabilize the clean energy economy in Maryland? And so through the market feedback that we received, a lot of small to mid-sized developers were struggling to reach safe harbor, to get their projects to a point where they can achieve financial closure for construction perm financing. So we create the concept of a bridge finance facility. How about we take 5 million, use 4.5 million of it as lending capacity for bridge finance of 12 months duration for small to mid-sized developers. The big developers don't really need our help that much. They are, private equity backed, they're flush with liquidity, so they can carry the costs of solar projects, community solar projects, all the way till perm financing. But it's the small to mid-sized local entrepreneurs that needed our help, or at least a mid-sized developer generally. So that's how this project was constructed, was developed, and we were able to close or approve an investment within 3 months of the fund launching, which was quite remarkable. But that's the speed of execution that we're aiming for. The other fund, the SRF, was again 5 million from the Strategic Investment Fund, and this was meant to replace what we would have managed under the Solar for All program. MCC was also going to be the statewide administrator for the Solar for All program, $62 million that vanished overnight. So quite a loss for us, for the clean energy economy. But using this 5 million, we were able to replace a facility or a partnership that we were going to have with Enterprise Community Development Partners, one of the largest nonprofit affordable housing developers in the country, Maryland headquartered. And we created a revolving line of credit to help them bring solar across this portfolio of 62 properties. And again, the same concept. How can they dip into this line of credit, bring those projects to a stage of maturity, and then take us out using permanent financing? So that's 10 million right there that we worked with MEA on. The third one, and this is a flagship fund, the Climate Catalytic Capital Fund was baked in the Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022, through which Maryland also adopted statewide net zero goals for 2040. And at that point, it was a $15 million fund. But through the track record that we established over the year and a half, in the latest budget session, we got an additional 27.5 million. So now it's a 23.75 million rather. So now it's a pretty healthy, almost $40 million fund. And we've tried to design the financial products that come out of this fund in a way that sync well with MEA's larger grant funded programs. Because again, grants from MEA and other state agencies tend to be, while very valuable, tend to flow once a project is done. And a lot of small to mid-sized developers, nonprofits who are beneficiaries of the grant programs don't really have the liquidity to take their impactful projects to the finish line, at least on a timely and efficient basis. So we've come up with investment windows in a way that not necessarily sync up 100%, but are quite close to the Maryland Energy Administration grant programs. And so the line of credits, so right now we have 3 investment windows in the CD program: lines of credits, bridge loans, and project feasibility grants. The lines of credits and the bridge loans directly sync up with many of the MEA grant programs, and the project feasibility grants actually give the initial funding that allow these nonprofits to submit more coherent, well thought out grant applications to MEA for the next funding cycle. So in a way, we're daisy chaining our CT funds with MEA, both at the front end, then the middle, and at the back end through permanent financing. And a great example of that is a project that recently closed in the town of Chestertown, Maryland. Chestertown is in a pretty conservative county, Kent County, but a progressive, a blue dot in a red sea, if you will. And they had ambitions of installing a 2.2 megawatt solar farm, 1 megawatt of which would go towards community solar, which will help reduce bills of local residents, and 1.2 megawatts for the town's own operations to almost bring them to net zero. That was their idea. They didn't know how to proceed. So MCEC, in addition to financing, also provides procurement and technical assistance. So our procurement team actually helped them design the project, select a vendor, provide vendor oversight, and using that information, the town of Chestertown was able to apply for MEA grants. In the meantime, our C3 fund provided them a bridge loan to get the project started, achieve safe harbor. In parallel, we worked on raising tax-exempt financing for construction to perm. So the bridge loan was approved and dispersed in December, and then the taxes and financing closed last month, paid us out. So we've recycled the capital already, and now they achieved, really attractive long-term financing through our conduit authority. And that $6 million loan will take them to the end of construction. Half of that gets paid back to ITCs and the MEA grant. And so they're only carrying forward 50% of the project finance till the end of the project life. So again, a great example of how it all comes together and how we work in coordination with the MEA. I'll stop there and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Anmol. I'm curious, this is a question for each one of you, and we'll start with Dan and go to Shawna and then Anmol. What's your pipeline look like right now? And what do you think it's going to look like next year?
So the pipeline nationally that we see, and we're getting a refinement of this in our impact assessment, is still very robust. A modest back look over the last 2 years shows over $1 billion of transactions mobilized by the green banks, even in the face of all the policy and market uncertainty. And going forward, it depends on what you believe about the supply chain for clean energy technology in a world that is hungry for power really across the board. But it's quite robust. It does tend to consolidate in the built environment, so decarbonizing the built environment, distributed energy resources, solar and storage in particular. I would suggest that we'll be looking at several $1 billion a year of addressable pipeline, probably 5 or 6 times what the green banks have current balance sheet to address, meaning that they can originate and lend, but are looking for capital partners to really continue to drive capacity at that scale of $5 billion a year of community scale clean energy lending originated through green banks, demonstrating that additional capital can come along and partner with Maryland and Utah and find good returns and good origination. I would say that this will be a relatively rocky period for the transition to the next sort of post-tax equity regime, but we've been there before as clean energy lenders. Characterized by fits and starts at the federal level. So maybe we'll come back to the policy table and discuss further tax credits for the sector writ large. But I think we're finding the ability to transact in a world of extreme power demand and decreasing cost profiles for clean energy, such that even without tax credits, we will still be the preferred resource in the energy sector for the foreseeable future. Natural gas turbines have a 4 or 5 year delay right now on a global basis. And while the supply chain for clean energy is shifting, we don't have those sorts of delays. We have speed into the marketplace and efficient deployment. So even without federal subsidy or tax credits, I think we'll still be the priority resource for quite a while.
Yeah, and I think in Utah, yeah, obviously this is a function of, to some degree, the capital that we have, and right, so we would love to be doing really large scale utility projects, but that's just simply not the role that we can play effectively. But looking at the scope of energy projects and kind of mirroring what Dan's saying about building decarbonization, we see that as like really the strongest need, right? People want to keep their costs down. They want to be able to manage costs. So we're seeing a lot of demand for energy efficiency. And then as that translates into housing, historically, Utah has been very sort of traditional in how we build housing. We do very large single family homes, we do very large multifamily projects, and historically have been very reluctant for high density housing. We've been very, sort of limiting and permitting and zoning, but we're starting to see that thawing. And so we're starting to see a lot of growth in infill development and small sort of modular development, townhomes for rent, for sale, things like that. So I'm starting to see that as an opportunity, particularly in Utah, where we have space. We still have space for that kind of development. But with land costs going up so significantly, we need to find smart ways to be able to develop. And that's definitely a space that we can enter quite comfortably.
And, in our case, the short answer is more than we can handle in terms of pipeline, right? We have about 35 million, 35 million uncommitted in the C3 fund. In fact, another area of coordination with MEA is that they're transferring over a loan program that they've operated for about 15 years, which is meant for nonprofits and small businesses. But recognizing that we are now a well-functioning state green bank, that loan program is transferring over to us, which is great. Doesn't really satisfy all the demand. And the demand for us comes from three places. One is the increasing need for BEPS compliance, Building Energy Performance Standards. It's a new regulation, but it's in the next year that buildings would start to pay fines if they don't meet those standards. So I think that'll drive a lot of action through both local government buildings, the MUSH market in general, and commercial real estate. We are also the program administrator for CPACE, but we don't necessarily originate, right? We're just the program administrator, but we've been noticing increased demand. Last year was the largest PACE year for us. We closed about $65 million of transactions. Community solar. We are a very community solar friendly state, and a lot of developers have invested capacity in developing that. So I think that's going to be a big pipeline for us. And then there is the sort of tail end of the MEA grant programs for zero emission vehicles, resiliency hubs. As those programs start choosing their awardees, we believe we can be a great source of liquidity and flexible financing to help them reach the finish line and get paid out their grant dollars.
All right, thank you. Next question, Shawna, you get to go first, and then Anmol, and Dan. Do you find the financing that y'all provide is generally part of a capital stack, or is it standalone more often?
Yeah, it's a good question. And usually, it kind of depends on which sector you're talking about. For us in the multifamily space, we are very much sort of a gap filler. We are really meant to be complementary to the capital stack that a developer is sourcing. We certainly will not be big enough to be able to support the entire project. A good example of that is we did a pre-development loan for just under $2 million last fall, but the total project cost was well over $100 million. But it was pre-development money that could come in, support the site acquisition, support those upfront costs that they needed to be able to cover before they could secure construction financing. So it really became an enabler to ensure that project could move forward. But in other projects, an example that we're looking at right now is actually working with a smaller developer who's looking to do single-family home development for sale and affordable housing at 80% AMI and lower. And that's something that we can come in completely. We want to because we're really mission aligned with the developer. They're doing high efficiency, all electric development. I think it's just a really great use case for this kind of capital. But it is always a mix, and it just really depends on which sectors that we're talking about.
Yeah, in our case, no, we've always been a part of a stack. Now, the other sources of finance, other sources of capital in that stack may not be financing per se, could be grants, but I can't think of one example when we were the only source of financing without either being complemented by public or other private sources. That's mostly by definition that we just don't have enough capital to be the only, only capital source.
I think those are both well stated. The only thing I would add is that as a general practice, green banks do try to provide additional leverage, meaning source additional private lending capacity, either on similar terms or can occasionally be cheaper, more flexible in order to induce private capital, so that the need for green banking diminishes over time. That's really a key theme, is that you intervene with this public-private finance strategy for targeted market gaps. The market understands that they can fill those gaps themselves, and then green banks can move on to the next sector of relevance and priority for public policy. And it's also interesting to contemplate whether, if there is literally no other money that's willing to support the transaction, that can be a diligence point for green banks as they understand whether it's actually a compelling value proposition that they're engaging in. If they can't find another dollar to match, that's probably the market telling them something about whether the investment opportunity is truly mature and ready to take to scale.
And that's a great point, Eddie, if I may add. For us, one of the reasons we like designing, our financing programs somewhat sync with the MEA grant making programs, because we know that MEA has such a great level of expertise and market insight that they've generally made the right call in terms of choosing a sector and choosing certain grantees. So we don't need to spend that much time in doing the impact due diligence, etc. We can spend more time where we are better experts, which is on the financial side of things.
Thank you. Now, Anmol, you get to go first in this next question. It's a really hard question, so brace yourself. No, I'm teasing. What does a partnership look like between a green bank and a state energy office? In practice, what does that look like? And again, when you answer that question, for states that are interested in establishing those types of relationships, what are common obstacles that get in the way of establishing that relationship and moving forward? And that's where we'll go Anmol, Dan, and Shawna.
Sure, and I've given a couple of examples which sort of home in on the financing programs, but let me give an example of challenges which are not exactly financial product related, right? So when MEA or the Maryland Department of Environment, sometimes there's some overlap there in terms of who has energy-related regulations. When they're trying to put out a regulatory push for, let's say, building energy performance standards, for instance, one of the biggest barriers or fears that they have to help sort of mollify in the stakeholders is how we're going to finance this, right? And so that's when we become good partners in showing up for events, showing up for webinars, talking with building owners, building operators, that actually the cost of financing is going to be lower than the savings that you generate from engaging in these state recommended, energy performance standards. So that helps the state energy office also sell to their stakeholders why what they're proposing makes economic sense, and they aren't just out there as, as evangelists for clean energy. So I think we provide that level of comfort to their stakeholder that this does make economic sense. And then, of course, if a state energy office does have grant programs, as I mentioned, a green bank could be a good source of liquidity to help those projects, those awardees get to the finish line so the grants can be dispersed. And finally, if a state energy office has additional funds which can be deployed in a more perpetual manner, like Dan was suggesting, green banks are a great place for revolving funds.
Is that me? I'm sorry, I lost track of the order here.
It's you, Dan.
Okay. So many examples of great interactions between green banks, either as state agencies or aligned nonprofits, but really just in the last sort of policy cycle that I observed up close in California was the legislative interest in stretching our version of the Reggie money, our cap and invest dollars in California, for maximum effect in a really contested environment because, we had literally 70 or 80 grant programs downstream from that, and we wanted to consolidate. And so a lot of people were concerned about losing out. So the question from the legislature in the form of some draft language that was sort of finance relevant or precise, but really not, was how do we make maximum impact with a modest allocation of our cap and invest dollars? And as that made its way through the legislative process, there was an opportunity for the Green Bank to say, at the margins, if you did it this way, we could lend, we could access the bond markets, we could do that translational service for what other lenders would be seeking. And so if it's a credit enhancement or some subordinate loan function, you will get the policy impact you're seeking. We're not promising it, but really as you drafted it, that was not going to work. So it's this sort of co-evolution of finance and public policy that's I found not just in that case, but across the country to be really impactful and beneficial on both sides. And the corollary, the thing that has been like a choke point has been when there's an allocation of funding for a lending program, but the risk tolerance isn't really specified. So green banks can say, well, can I afford to lose this? Or am I expected to be like a AAA credit rate lender, but drive impact in technologies and communities? And that can cause people to kind of get stuck because you don't know what your mandate is. And it's not obvious from the public policy side that that has to be specified. So it is incumbent upon the conversation to find that common ground because that influences the culture of the green bank's activity. You could have a very conservative program over here. Don't ever lose this money, do good work, but don't lose it. And then you've got some risk appetite with this funding stream because the policy community has told you to do things they can't do and what the market's not doing now. So just being really clear about the culture and risk tolerance at the start, then you can unleash the potential of the green lending activity more fully.
Yeah, and I'm going to mirror a lot of the comments that Anmol and Dan just shared, but I do think, from the state perspective, you know, at least for our state, really a core function is looking at policy development and then regulatory bodies, right? And the conversations that I often have when I'm talking with our state agencies or with our local advocacy groups is, okay, well, we have the policy, but now what? How do we actually see this get taken up, see the adoption occur? And that's really when it's pick up the phone and call it Green Bank, because we're the ones that are actually implementing the solution, whether it's offering the financing or in most case offering the technical assistance. It's helping be able to actually realize these projects that kind of hit the hurdle. Once the policy's in place, we know that there's an effective date that's coming, but folks don't really know where to start. I do think that that's really an ideal time to be collaborating with green banks, and of course, as much as possible, anticipating that partnership. I think it's really hard to stand something up very quickly in short notice, having come from the state side. I know we need time to get all of our ducks in a row, and I think starting those conversations early on with a green bank will only behoove everyone, particularly if it involves any kind of competitive procurement. We all know those RFP cycles take a really long time. We need teams to evaluate them. And so being in a position to respond quickly is challenging. So it does take that planning up front to ensure the partnership between a green bank and a state energy office is really as effective as possible.
Thank you. Okay, Dan, you get to go first. You don't have to worry about who goes first this time. What is your work through with PACE programs in your area look like? Are you all active with the PACE programs?
We are at the Green Bank 50 level because our members are, and because maybe more importantly, the commercial capital that wants to do clean energy lending in partnership with us is really excited by that instrument. I'm from California, the birthplace of PACE. We saw how it grew quickly and kind of got ahead of the consumer protection elements that we needed to have for residential, and we still haven't really recovered from that, candidly. And I think we should focus on it because it is just as good for residential as it is for commercial. But commercial is where the action is now. we are on the cusp, I think, of providing some pretty interesting partnership opportunities for our membership and by extension through our state partners that can take commercial PACE lending down to a scale that will be really impactful for small businesses, particularly small businesses in underserved communities. The financing approach is known. The technologies are secure. Obviously, the repayment mechanism is as robust as it gets. And I think it's an opportunity for green banks to marry what capital we do have and our origination expertise to unlock what is increasingly a very attractive place for commercial lenders to be. So that's something that we're keen on doing, and I think you'll see a lot of traction from green banks in the next 6 to 18 months on commercial PACE specifically.
Yeah, on the pay side, it's really interesting and a bit of a full circle moment for me because I was the one that wrote our CPACE legislation for the state. So it was really exciting to be able to get the legislation passed, stand up the administration on the state side, and now I'm in a position to actually be able to finance the project. So it's a really kind of a mind trip in some respects. But we're really excited about CPACE for a lot of the reasons that Dan's expressing. But I think most of us, came into CPACE with the understanding that this is going to be a tool accessible to businesses of all sizes, particularly small businesses that have a high need. They may not have the same amount of capital on hand to be able to do these high cost projects, but they would be able to benefit. As we've seen over the last several years, the money available for CPACE projects is moving into the big project sizes. I mean, at the time when we did our first CPACE project, it was actually the biggest in the country. It was well over $100 million. And it's now that's where the big capital is sitting, and we're seeing those small and mid-sized businesses have been stranded. And that's really where we think our greatest value is where we can bring and work with those businesses. And now we have access to tools nationally that will allow us to be able to underwrite and service those loans much easier than having to build the entire infrastructure in-house. We're certainly benefiting from a lot of people having learned how to do that up front, but that's going to enable us to be able to close more deals faster. And then I think what's really exciting about it is the ability to access secondary markets with it. We're going to be capital constrained, right? We're going to find all the projects, we'll get our capital allocated, but then what? If we're able to sell those projects and we're able to, bring that capital back in-house, we're able to do more projects with it. So that's a really appealing part of PACE for us.
And in our case, as I mentioned, we are the CPACE program administrator for most of Maryland's counties. Out of the 23 counties in Baltimore City, we manage in 19 counties and Baltimore City. And till about 8 months ago, we did not manage it directly. We had a subcontractor managing the CPACE program, but we brought it in-house because we saw the potential for CPACE to be such an attractive tool as a state tries to meet its ambitious climate goals. And we were right, because this past year has been the largest year for CPACE deployment in Maryland. We closed the largest deal in our history, $45 million for a new Marriott built in Frederick County, and then 16.5 for a office building to multifamily housing conversion in Baltimore City just last month. Again, things that reflect national trends, especially the one Shawna was referring to, which is the size moving to, the trend towards the larger transaction sizes. Now that we have the program in-house, we want to see what levers we can use to help address the smaller side of the market, to help maybe move more capital in underserved areas of Baltimore City to credit enhancement, interest rate buy downs. So what levers can we use as a green bank to ensure that CPACE is realizing its full potential? So for us, early days as a new program administrator, but we're pretty confident that we can make a difference.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, last question. And Shawna, you're going to be the one under the gun first, and Dan, you get to close this in this last question. What do you want people to remember about this presentation and about the services that y'all provide?
That's a great question, Eddy. I think, especially speaking to the finance committee, I'm sure we all kind of get stuck in our jargon. We get stuck in our sort of wonky technical language. And there's a lot to be said about that, right? We all need to be experts in this field. We need to be able to assess these projects effectively. But really, what I would love for this group to take away is that green banks are a resource to help you accomplish the many issues we're facing on a state level, whether it's affordability challenges, whether it's building decarbonization and climate goals. Think of green banks as a solution to be able to address those core goals across your state and not just the technical stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to what Shawna said, I would say that, green banks, we are not monoliths, right? We tend to reflect the circumstances in which we are born. So I think each state will have a different version of MCEC. But then state energy offices, I think, can actually help shape the green banks in the states to be a good complementary resource to what the state energy office offers, because I think it does help in building core expertise in financial services in different intermediary outside of state energy office.
I'm at pains to let the operators say what should be said, and they just did it very eloquently. The only thing I would add is that the GB50 is also here to help states explore green banks where they are not present, to expand the capacity and make the connection. So please just reach out to us. This is our role in this ecosystem, is to help states and green banks get connected and build something impactful for your communities. So we are standing by.
So as a visual indicator, give me a thumbs up if it's okay if participants contact you if they have additional questions. Okay. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Shawna. Thank you, Anmol. This was a very interesting dialogue. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your knowledge. I'm going to turn the podium back over to Sam now.
All right. Thank you so much. And again, another big thanks to our speakers here today. Just as a reminder, I know it's still a few months away, but it always kind of creeps up on us. The NASEO annual meeting will be taking place October 27th through 30th, and that'll be in Boulder, Colorado this year. So be on the lookout to register. We'd love to have you there. Other than that, please have a wonderful rest of your summer. Try and stay cool, and we will see you in the fall for our next call on our session.
Thank you all so much.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everyone.
Thank you for inviting us. Bye bye.
Thanks, Eddy.
Thank you.